Maya Chen was having one of those weeks where everything seemed to go wrong at once. Her biggest client at work had just rejected 3 design concepts she'd spent weeks perfecting. Her boyfriend of 2 years had suddenly decided he needed to find himself and moved out of their apartment. And now, stuck in traffic on a rainy Thursday evening, she just remembered that tomorrow was her grandmother's 80th birthday party. She smacked her palm against the steering wheel. How could she have forgotten? Her grandmother Rose had raised her for 5 years after her parents' messy divorce. Rose was the one who taught her to draw, who stayed up late helping with school projects, who never missed a single one of her art shows. And here she was, 28 years old and so wrapped up in her own problems that she'd completely blanked on getting a gift. The traffic finally cleared, and Maya spotted a large department store just off the highway. She had maybe 30 minutes before they closed. She pulled into the parking lot, grabbed her umbrella, and ran through the rain toward the entrance. Inside, the store was nearly empty. A tired-looking employee was already stacking chairs near the entrance. Maya hurried past the perfume counters, past the jewelry section with its glittering displays, and headed straight for home goods. She had no idea what to get. Her grandmother didn't need much. She lived simply in her small apartment, surrounded by photos and memories rather than fancy things. Maya wandered through the aisles, growing more frustrated by the minute. Everything felt wrong. Too expensive, too impersonal, too trendy for an 80-year-old woman who still handwrote letters and listened to records on an actual record player. Then she turned a corner and saw it. A cream-colored blanket, soft and thick, folded neatly on a clearance shelf. It had delicate embroidered edges, tiny flowers stitched in pale blue thread. The moment Maya touched it, she felt something shift in her chest. It reminded her of the old blanket her grandmother used to wrap around her during winter evenings. The one Rose would drape over both of them while she read stories or they watched old movies together. The price tag said it was from a store closing sale. $30 marked down from $80. Maya didn't hesitate. She grabbed it and headed for the checkout. "That's a beautiful choice," the cashier said, an older woman with kind eyes. "This inventory came from a warehouse that's been closed for decades. You're getting something special." Maya smiled politely, not really listening. She was already thinking about how she'd wrap it, whether she had time to stop for a card, what she'd write to her grandmother to apologize for the simple gift. The next evening, Maya arrived at her grandmother's apartment building, carrying the wrapped blanket and a small cake from Rose's favorite bakery. The party was just family. Maya's mother, Linda, her uncle Tony, her younger cousin Beth, and of course Rose herself. Rose opened the door with that warm smile that had comforted Maya through countless childhood disappointments. Her grandmother's hair was completely white now, pulled back in the same neat bun she'd worn for as long as Maya could remember. Her hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, still moved with the same grace they always had. "There's my girl," Rose said, pulling Maya into a hug that smelled like lavender and old books. They had dinner first. Linda had cooked Rose's favorites, and they all shared stories and laughed. Uncle Tony told embarrassing stories about Rose from when he was young, and Beth showed everyone photos from her semester abroad. It felt good to be there, surrounded by family, away from her empty apartment and her work problems. When it came time for gifts, Maya felt suddenly nervous. Uncle Tony had brought a beautiful silk scarf. Linda had gotten Rose a first edition of her favorite novel. Beth had created a photo album of 3 generations of women in their family. And Maya had brought a $30 blanket from a clearance bin. "Mine's simple," Maya said, handing over the package. "I'm sorry it's not more." Rose's fingers worked at the wrapping paper with deliberate care. She never ripped into presents like Maya did. She always unwrapped them slowly, smoothing out the paper as if the wrapping itself was part of the gift. When the blanket finally emerged, Rose went very still. Her hands gripped the fabric, and for a long moment she just stared at it. Then she lifted it to her face, pressing the soft material against her cheek. "Grandma," Maya asked, "do you like it?" Rose's eyes were wet with tears. "It's beautiful, dear," she whispered, but her voice sounded strange, shaky, almost frightened. "Are you okay?" Linda moved closer, concerned. Yes, Rose said quickly, wiping her eyes. "It just reminds me of something from a long time ago. It's perfect, Maya, truly perfect. But the way her grandmother held that blanket, the way her fingers traced the embroidered edges, the way she couldn't seem to stop touching it, something about all of it felt off. This wasn't just appreciation for a thoughtful gift. This was something else. Something deeper. Later that night, as Maya was leaving, she glanced back and saw her grandmother sitting in her armchair, the blanket draped across her lap. Rose was running her hands over it again and again as if searching for something. As if she recognized it, but that was impossible, wasn't it? Maya had just bought it yesterday from a clearance shelf. It was brand new, never used. There was no way her grandmother could have any connection to it. Still, as Maya drove home through the dark streets, she couldn't shake the image of her grandmother's face when she'd first seen that blanket. The tears hadn't been tears of simple gratitude. They'd been something much more complicated, something that looked almost like recognition, something that looked almost like fear. Maya told herself she was reading too much into it. Her grandmother was 80 years old. Maybe the blanket reminded her of something from her past. Maybe it brought back memories. That would be natural, wouldn't it? But deep in her gut, Maya felt that something was wrong. Something she didn't understand yet. Something that simple cream-colored blanket had triggered in her grandmother. Some old memory or secret that Rose had kept buried for a very long time. She just had no idea how much that blanket was about to change everything. 3 weeks passed, and Maya had almost forgotten about the strange moment at her grandmother's birthday party. Life had moved on. She'd landed a new client, started going to therapy to deal with the breakup, and was slowly putting the pieces of her routine back together. Then her phone rang at 6 in the morning. Maya, "It's Mom." Linda's voice was tight with panic. "Your grandmother fell. We're at the hospital." Maya was out of bed in seconds, pulling on clothes, grabbing her keys. Her hands shook as she drove to Memorial Hospital, running through every worst-case scenario in her mind. Rose was 80 years old. A fall at that age could mean anything. She found her mother in the waiting room, clutching a paper cup of coffee. Linda's eyes were red. "She broke her hip," Linda said. She was reaching for something on a high shelf and lost her balance. The neighbor heard her calling for help and used the spare key to get in. She pressed her fingers against her temples. "They're taking her into surgery in an hour. They said the recovery will be long. 6 weeks minimum, maybe more." Maya sat down hard in the plastic chair. Is she going to be okay? They think so. But she can't go back to her apartment, not like it is now. She'll need help. Grab bars in the bathroom, a shower chair, her bed lowered. Someone will need to organize her medications, make sure the apartment is safe. Linda looked exhausted. "I would do it, but I'm leaving for that conference in Boston tomorrow." 2 weeks. "I can't cancel." "I'll do it," Maya said immediately. "Are you sure? What about work?" "I can work from anywhere. I'll take my laptop. Grandma needs this." Maya squeezed her mother's hand. "I want to help. The surgery went well." Rose was groggy but alive when Maya saw her that afternoon. Her grandmother's face looked so small against the white hospital pillow, more fragile than Maya had ever seen her. "Don't fuss," Rose mumbled, though her eyes were soft with gratitude. "I'm tougher than I look." "I know you are," Maya said. "But I'm staying at your place for a bit, getting it ready for when you come home." No arguments. Rose tried to protest, but she was too tired to fight. 2 days later, Maya moved into her grandmother's apartment with a suitcase, her laptop, and a list of modifications that needed to be made before Rose came home. The apartment smelled exactly like her childhood, like lavender sachets and old paper and the faint sweetness of the tea Rose drank every morning. Maya got to work. She called a handyman to install grab bars in the bathroom and next to the bed. She organized the medicine cabinet, throwing out expired bottles and making a chart for Rose's new prescriptions. She cleared pathways and moved furniture to make the space safer for someone recovering from hip surgery. On the 4th day, Maya decided to wash all the bedding so Rose would come home to fresh sheets. She stripped the bed and gathered the blankets, including the cream-colored one Maya had given her. It had been draped across the foot of Rose's bed since the birthday party. Maya loaded everything into her grandmother's ancient washing machine, added detergent, and started the cycle. When it was done, she transferred the wet items to the dryer, but something didn't feel right. One of the blankets felt heavier than it should. She pulled out the cream-colored blanket and examined it. There, along the hem, she felt a small, hard lump. At first, she thought maybe a button had gotten caught in the wash. Or perhaps there was a manufacturing defect she hadn't noticed before. But as she ran her fingers along the edge, she realized the stitching looked different there. It wasn't machine-sewn like the rest of the blanket. This section looked hand-stitched, the thread slightly darker, the pattern more irregular. Maya's curiosity got the better of her. She remembered seeing a sewing kit in her grandmother's hallway closet. She found it and pulled out a small tool her grandmother had once called a seam ripper. Maya had watched Rose use it hundreds of times to fix clothes and repair torn pillowcases. She sat down at the kitchen table and carefully began to work the seam ripper under the hand-stitched thread. It came apart easily, as if whoever had sewn it wanted it to be opened someday. The fabric fell away, revealing a small pocket sewn inside the hem. Inside the pocket was something wrapped in what looked like old wax paper, the kind people used decades ago before plastic bags became common. Maya's heart started beating faster. She carefully unfolded the protective wrapping. Inside was a letter. The paper was yellowed with age, the edges soft and fragile. The ink had faded to a brownish color, but the handwriting was still clear, written in careful cursive that people didn't use much anymore. At the top of the page was a date, August 15th, 1968. Maya's hands began to tremble. The letter began, "My dearest Rose, if you're reading this, then the blanket has finally found its way back to you." Maya read the first few lines, then stopped. Her mind was racing. This was addressed to her grandmother. This letter had been hidden in this blanket since 1968, but that was impossible. Maya had just bought this blanket 3 weeks ago from a department store clearance shelf. It was supposed to be new, unless it wasn't new at all. She remembered what the cashier had said. This inventory came from a warehouse that's been closed for decades. Maya looked at the blanket tag. Sullivan Textiles. She'd never heard of that company. Most blankets these days came from huge corporations with names everyone recognized. She picked up her phone and searched for Sullivan Textiles. The results showed a small textile company that had operated in Massachusetts from 1948 to 1972. They'd specialized in handmade blankets and linens. The company had closed after the owner died, and all remaining inventory had been put into storage. The timeline made sense. This blanket had been made sometime before 1972, possibly right around 1968 when this letter was dated. It had sat in a warehouse for over 50 years, and then some department store had bought the old inventory and sold it as vintage clearance items. Maya looked down at the letter again. Her grandmother's name was right there at the top. "My dearest Rose." She knew she shouldn't read someone else's personal letter. This was private. This belonged to her grandmother. But her grandmother was in a hospital bed recovering from surgery. And this letter had been hidden for more than 50 years, and Maya had been the one to buy this blanket, to bring it back to Rose after all this time. Surely that meant something. Maya took a deep breath and began to read. Maya's eyes moved slowly across the faded words, and with each line her understanding of her family's history began to crumble. "My dearest Rose, if you're reading this, then the blanket has finally found its way back to you. I pray this letter finds you well, though I know the years must have been hard. I'm writing this from my mother's shop, surrounded by the blankets and linens she spent her whole life making. Tomorrow morning I ship out to Vietnam. Tomorrow morning everything changes." Maya paused, her throat tight. Vietnam. That war had ended before she was born, but she knew it had torn apart a whole generation. She kept reading. "I need to tell you the truth, Rose, all of it. Even though your parents have made it clear that we can never be together, even though you're promised to someone else now, you deserve to know. You deserve to understand why I've hidden these letters, why I've asked my mother to sew them into the things I gave you." Letters. Plural. Maya glanced at the blanket. Were there more hidden somewhere? "That night in June at the lake when you told me about the baby, I wanted to run away with you right then. I wanted to take you far from your parents and their plans for your life. But you were scared, and I understood. Your family has money, position, expectations. I'm just a kid from the South Side whose mother runs a textile shop. In their eyes, I'll never be good enough for you." Maya stopped breathing. The baby. Rose had been pregnant in 1968. Her mind raced through the math. Her mother, Linda, was born in March 1969. 9 months before that would be June 1968. No, that couldn't be right. Maya kept reading, her hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. "I know you're going to marry Robert Chen in September. Your mother told my mother last week, probably hoping the news would get back to me. I know you think it's the right thing to do. That Robert is kind and stable and will give our child a good life. I know you think I won't come back from this war, and maybe you're right. The odds aren't good, Rose. I'm not stupid. I know what I'm walking into. Robert Chen. That was Maya's grandfather, the man who had died 5 years ago, the man who had raised Linda, who had taught Maya to ride a bike and make paper airplanes, the kindest man Maya had ever known. But according to this letter, he wasn't Linda's biological father. But I need you to know the truth. Even if I don't survive to tell you myself, I need you to know that I love you. I love our child. And if I could give you the life you deserve, I would fight your parents and the whole world to make it happen. But I can't give you anything except this letter and the promise that I'll be thinking of you every single day I'm gone. Maya's vision blurred with tears. She wiped her eyes and kept reading. My mother has agreed to help me. She's made several blankets, each with a hidden pocket like this one. I've written letters and sealed them in wax paper to protect them. Some of the blankets will be sold through the shop. Some I've already given to you as gifts. I know you had to return most of them to keep your parents from getting suspicious, but maybe someday, somehow, one of these letters will find its way back to you. Maya thought about all the times she'd watched her grandmother shop at vintage stores and estate sales. Rose had always loved old blankets and linens. Maya had thought it was just a preference for quality craftsmanship, but now she wondered if Rose had been searching for something all these years. Searching for these hidden letters. If you're reading this, it means you found one of them. It means something I made, something I touched, has come back to you after all this time. I hope it brings you comfort. I hope it reminds you that what we had was real, even if the world told us it was wrong. The letter continued, and Maya read details about their summer together, about stolen moments and secret meetings, about Rose's parents discovering their relationship and forbidding her to see him, about James, the letter writer, working in his mother's shop and preparing to be drafted, about their last night together, holding each other by the lake and making promises they both knew they probably couldn't keep. And then toward the end, the words that made Maya's heart stop completely. I don't know what kind of man our son will become. I don't know if Robert will love him like his own or if the boy will ever wonder about his real father. But I need you to promise me something, Rose. If I don't come home, if the worst happens, promise me you'll tell him someday. Tell him that his father loved him before he was even born. Tell him that I would have given anything to watch him grow up. Tell him that dying for my country was my duty, but leaving him and you was the hardest thing I ever had to do. Our son. Maya read the words 3 times. Our son, but Linda was a woman. Linda was Maya's mother, not someone's son. Then it hit her. The letter was dated August 1968. Linda was born March 1969. When this letter was written, James couldn't have known whether Rose was carrying a boy or a girl. He'd just assumed. He'd called the baby a son, but the baby had been a daughter all along. Linda. James was talking about Linda. Maya set the letter down on the table, her whole body numb. She stared at the words until they started to swim in front of her eyes. Her mother didn't know. All these years, Linda had believed Robert Chen was her biological father. She'd grieved him when he died, had spoken at his funeral about the man who taught her everything she knew about being a good person. And it was true. Robert had been that man. He'd raised Linda, loved her, been her father in every way that mattered, but biologically, Linda's father was someone named James, a soldier who'd gone to Vietnam in 1968 and apparently never came home. Maya picked up the letter again and read the last paragraph. I'm scared. Rose, I'm more scared than I've ever been, but I'm also grateful. Grateful for that summer. Grateful for you. Grateful for our child, even though I'll probably never meet him. Whatever happens, know that you made my life worth living. Know that every good thing I ever was, I was because you believed I could be better than where I came from. Take care of our boy. Tell him about me someday, and if you ever find this letter, know that I died loving you both. Forever yours, James Sullivan. Maya sat in her grandmother's kitchen for a long time, holding that letter, trying to process what it meant. Her grandfather wasn't her grandfather. Her grandmother had kept this secret for over 50 years. Her mother's entire understanding of who she was and where she came from was based on something that wasn't exactly true, and Maya had discovered it all because of a $30 blanket she'd bought on clearance 3 weeks ago. She looked at the blanket spread across the kitchen table, the innocent cream fabric with its delicate embroidered edges. Somewhere in Massachusetts more than 50 years ago, A young soldier and his mother had sewn letters into blankets, hoping that somehow, someday, truth would find its way home. And now it had. Maya was holding that truth in her hands, and she had absolutely no idea what to do with it. Maya didn't sleep that night. She sat in her grandmother's living room, reading and rereading the letter until she'd memorized every word. She searched online for James Sullivan, for Sullivan Textiles, for any trace of the young man who'd written those words in 1968. She found records. James Michael Sullivan, born 1947, died 1969. Killed in action in Vietnam. He'd been 22 years old. There was even a photo from a memorial website, a young man in uniform with dark eyes and a nervous smile. Maya stared at that photo for a long time, looking for traces of her mother in his face, trying to see her own features reflected in a stranger who died decades before she was born. The next morning, Maya drove to the hospital. She'd barely slept, had downed 3 cups of coffee, and still felt like she was moving through fog, but she knew she had to talk to her grandmother. Rose was sitting up in bed when Maya arrived, looking stronger than she had a few days ago. She smiled when Maya walked in, but the smile faded when she saw Maya's face. "What's wrong, honey?" Rose asked. Maya pulled a chair close to the bed. She reached into her bag and carefully withdrew the letter, still in its protective wax paper wrapping. The color drained from Rose's face. Her hands, which had been resting calmly on the blanket, began to tremble. "Where did you find that?" Rose whispered. "In the blanket. The one I gave you for your birthday." Maya's voice was gentle. "I was washing it and found a lump in the hem. The stitching looked different, so I opened it." Rose closed her eyes. A tear slid down her weathered cheek. "I thought they were all destroyed. His mother promised me. After James died, after I married Robert, I begged her to burn everything. She said she had. She must have kept some," Maya said. "Maybe she couldn't let go. The blankets were put in storage when the shop closed. I bought one from a clearance sale without knowing." Rose was crying now, silent tears running down her face. Maya reached out and took her grandmother's hand. "Grandma, I read it. I know I shouldn't have, but I read it." "Then you know," Rose said, her voice breaking. "You know about Linda? That James was her biological father?" "Yes." Rose nodded slowly. "Robert knew. I told him everything before we married. He was my friend first, you know. We grew up on the same street. He knew about James, knew I was pregnant, and he loved me anyway. He married me and raised Linda as his own. He was the best man I ever knew." "I believe that," Maya said, and she meant it. Robert Chen had been wonderful. "This didn't change that. Does Mom know?" Maya asked. Rose shook her head. "No. We decided before she was born that we would never tell her. Robert was her father in every way that mattered. We didn't want her to feel confused or hurt. And as she grew up, it became harder and harder to imagine telling her. What would be the point? Robert was gone. James had been gone for 50 years. Why drag up pain from so long ago? Maya understood the logic, but she also felt the weight of the secret. "Grandma, she deserves to know." "I know," Rose whispered. "I've known for years, especially after Robert died. I thought about telling her at the funeral, but I couldn't. It felt like I'd be taking something away from her, from the father she'd loved and lost. Or you'd be giving her something," Maya said softly. "Another piece of her story. Another person who loved her before she was even born." Rose looked at Maya with red-rimmed eyes. "You think I should tell her? I think she'll be hurt if she finds out some other way. And this letter exists now. There might be others." Maya paused. "Did you ever try to find them? The other blankets?" Rose nodded. "For years. I went to every estate sale, every antique shop, every vintage store I could find. I thought if I could find them all, I could keep the secret buried. But I never found a single one. I thought maybe they'd been thrown away or destroyed. And eventually I stopped looking. I tried to forget, until I brought you that blanket." "Until you brought me that blanket," Rose agreed. "When I saw it, when I touched it, I knew immediately. I recognized the fabric, the stitching. James's mother had a specific way of embroidering the edges. I knew there had to be a letter inside." She squeezed Maya's hand. "I was terrified. Terrified you'd find it. Terrified the truth would come out after all these years. And now it has," Maya said. They sat in silence for a moment, just holding hands across the hospital bed. "What was he like?" Maya finally asked. "James," Rose's face softened. He was kind, funny. He drew pictures for me, silly little cartoons that made me laugh. He worked in his mother's shop after school, and he'd save up money to take me to the movies. We'd sit in the back row and he'd hold my hand and tell me about all the places we'd travel after the war. She smiled sadly. He wanted to see California. He'd never been west of Pennsylvania. My mother has his eyes, Maya said, thinking of the photo she'd found online. She does, and his stubbornness, and his talent. Robert always said Linda got her artistic ability from my side of the family. But it was James. He could have been an artist if things had been different. Maya felt a strange grief for this man she'd never met. This grandfather who died before her mother was even born. Mom's coming back from Boston in 10 days. We should tell her together. Rose looked frightened but determined. Yes, we should. She'll be angry. She has every right to be. She'll be hurt, Maya corrected gently, but she'll understand eventually. And Grandma, this doesn't change what Robert meant to her. He'll always be her dad, but maybe she can have both. The memory of the father who raised her and the story of the father who never got the chance. Rose wiped her eyes. When did you get so wise? I learned from watching you, Maya said. Over the next week, Maya visited her grandmother every day. They talked about James, about that summer in 1968, about the choices Rose had made. Rose showed Maya the few photos she'd kept hidden in a box at the back of her closet. James in his uniform. James and Rose at the lake. James with his mother outside the textile shop. Maya made copies of everything, including the letter. She researched James's military service and found that he'd been awarded a Bronze Star for pulling 3 wounded soldiers to safety during an ambush. He'd gone back for a 4th and was killed by enemy fire. She also found something else. James had a sister who was still alive. Catherine Sullivan, now Catherine Morrison, living in Portland. Maya found her on social media, an elderly woman with grandchildren of her own. Maya sent her a message. I think we might be family. Catherine responded within hours. She'd never known about Rose or Linda. Her brother had kept that secret. But when Maya sent her copies of the letter and photos, Catherine cried. She said she'd always wondered why her mother had kept those blankets in storage, why she'd refused to sell them or give them away. She was protecting her son's last wishes, Catherine wrote. She couldn't destroy them, but she couldn't let them go either. When Linda returned from Boston, Maya and Rose sat her down in the hospital room. Rose held her daughter's hand and told her everything. Linda's reaction went through stages. Shock, disbelief, anger, grief. She cried for Robert, for the father she'd lost twice now. She cried for James, the father she'd never known. And finally, she cried for her mother, who'd carried this secret for so long. The weeks that followed were strange and difficult. Linda needed time to process everything, and Maya and Rose gave her that space. But slowly, bit by bit, Linda began to ask questions. She wanted to know everything about James. What he liked, what he dreamed about, how he'd made Rose laugh. Rose told her stories she'd kept buried for 50 years. About the way James would whistle while he worked. About how he'd once climbed a tree to rescue a neighbor's cat and got stuck himself. About the night by the lake when they'd promised to love each other forever, not knowing how short forever would be. Linda looked at the photos Maya had found, touching her father's face in the faded images. I have his nose, she said one day, surprise in her voice. All my life people said I looked like Mom, but I have his nose. And his hands. Maya had contacted Catherine, James's sister, and after several emotional phone calls, they'd arranged to meet. On a sunny Saturday in late November, 3 generations of women drove to Portland to meet the family they'd never known they had. Catherine Morrison was 76 years old, a retired teacher with warm eyes and James's same nervous smile. She opened her door and immediately pulled Linda into a hug. You look like him, Catherine whispered. Oh, my dear, you look so much like my brother. They spent the afternoon together, Catherine and her children and grandchildren, Rose and Linda and Maya. Catherine had kept boxes of James's things. His drawings, mostly silly cartoons, but some beautiful sketches of landscapes and people. His letters home from basic training. His Bronze Star, which Catherine insisted Linda should have. He died saving people, Catherine told them. That's who he was. Always trying to help, always putting others first. She pulled out an old photo album. Our mother never got over losing him. She kept his room exactly as he left it for 10 years. And those blankets, the ones she made before he shipped out, she could never sell them. She'd start to, then change her mind. After she died, I put everything in storage. I couldn't throw them away, but I couldn't keep them either. That's how I found one, Maya explained. A department store bought old inventory from estate sales and warehouses. They were selling them as vintage clearance items. Catherine touched Maya's hand. I'm glad. I'm glad one of them found its way home. That's what James would have wanted. They exchanged phone numbers and email addresses. Catherine invited them to Thanksgiving, and Linda, after hesitating, said yes. As they were leaving, Catherine gave Linda a small box. These are his dog tags, she said, and a few other things. I think he'd want you to have them. In the car on the way home, Linda opened the box. Inside were the dog tags, a St. Christopher medal, and a small sketchbook. Linda opened the sketchbook carefully. On the first page was a drawing of a young woman by a lake, her hair blowing in the wind, her face turned toward the sun. That's me, Rose whispered from the back seat. He drew that the week before he left. Linda turned the pages slowly. There were more drawings. The textile shop, a cat in a tree, and on the last page a sketch of a baby's face, generic and hopeful, with a note written underneath. Our future, our hope. Linda closed the book and held it against her chest. She didn't say anything, just cried quietly while Maya drove and Rose held her hand from the back seat. The next week, Rose came home from the hospital. Her apartment had been modified and was ready for her recovery. The physical therapy was hard, but Rose was determined. Maya stayed for another few weeks, helping her grandmother adjust to life with limited mobility. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Rose wrapped in the cream-colored blanket, she told Maya something she'd never said before. I loved them both, you know, Robert and James, in different ways, in different times. James was my first love, my summer romance, the father of my child. But Robert was my partner, my best friend, the man who chose me and Linda every single day for 40 years. I don't have to pick which love was more real. They both were. I know, Grandma, Maya said. Does Linda understand that? Rose asked. Does she know that just because Robert wasn't her biological father doesn't mean he wasn't her real father? She's getting there, Maya assured her. It's a lot to process. But she looked at me the other day and said something I think you need to hear. She said I was lucky. I had one father who loved me my whole life, and another who loved me before I was even born. How many people can say that? Rose's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Maya picked up her phone and showed Rose a photo. Catherine sent this today. She found another blanket in her mother's storage unit. She's sending it to you. She thinks there might be another letter. Rose touched the phone screen gently. Maybe there are words I need to hear. Maybe James wrote things he couldn't say in person. I'd like to know. Over the next few months, Catherine found 3 more blankets. Each contained a letter. Each letter revealed another piece of James and Rose's story. They were love letters mostly. Words of hope and fear, dreams and promises. Linda read them all, and with each one she seemed to understand her mother's choices a little better. In March, on what would have been Linda's 56th birthday, the family gathered at Rose's apartment. Catherine and her family drove down from Portland. They brought flowers and a cake and stories about James. This is weird, right? Linda said at one point, laughing through tears. Having a birthday party where we celebrate my dad who I never met. It's not weird, Catherine said firmly. It's healing, and it was. Slowly, bit by bit, the family was healing. The secret that had been buried for 50 years was finally out, and instead of destroying them, it had given them something unexpected. It had given them more family, more stories, more love. Maya watched her grandmother, mother, and great-aunt sitting together, laughing about something Catherine had said. 3 women from different generations connected by a man who died over 50 years ago. Connected by letters hidden in blankets, by secrets kept and finally shared. By love that had somehow survived war and time and loss. She thought about that rainy Thursday evening, when she'd rushed into a department store, stressed and unprepared, grabbing a clearance blanket without thinking. If she'd chosen something else, if she'd gone to a different store, if she'd remembered to buy a gift earlier, none of this would have happened. The truth would have stayed buried. James would have remained forgotten. Linda would never have known about her biological father. Catherine would never have met her brother's daughter and granddaughter. Sometimes, Maya thought, the simplest choices lead to the most extraordinary discoveries. Sometimes a $30 blanket bought in a hurry can change everything. Rose caught Maya's eye and smiled, pulling the cream-colored blanket tighter around her shoulders. It had become her favorite despite all the memories it carried. Or maybe because of them. "Thank you," Rose mouthed silently. Maya nodded, understanding that her grandmother wasn't just thanking her for the blanket. She was thanking her for buying it, for washing it, for opening that carefully stitched hem, for bringing the truth home after all these years, for helping her family find their way back to a love they'd never known was waiting for them. 2 years had passed since Maya bought that cream-colored blanket from a clearance shelf. 2 years since a simple gift had unraveled 50 years of secrets and changed their family forever. Rose was 82 now, moving slower but still sharp as ever. She'd made a full recovery from her hip surgery and insisted on living independently in her apartment, though Maya and Linda checked on her regularly. The cream-colored blanket still draped across her favorite armchair, worn softer now from constant use. Linda had quit her corporate job and gone back to school to study art history. She said it felt like honoring both her fathers, the one who'd encouraged her creativity and the one who'd dreamed of being an artist himself. She'd even started painting, something she hadn't done since college. Her first completed piece hung in Rose's living room, a portrait of a young soldier by a lake, drawn from the photograph Catherine had given them. Maya had also made changes. The breakup that had seemed so devastating 2 years ago now felt like a blessing. She'd started her own design company and was doing better than she ever had working for someone else. More importantly, she'd learned something about family, about secrets, and about how the smallest actions could have the biggest consequences. Catherine had become a regular part of their lives. She visited every few months, and they'd spent last Thanksgiving together in Portland with her whole family. Linda's half-cousins, Catherine's grandchildren, had welcomed them with open arms. It turned out that family wasn't just about blood or legal documents. It was about choosing to show up, to care, to make room for new connections. The strangest part of the whole story came 6 months ago. A man named David Sullivan had contacted Maya through social media. He'd seen her posts about James and recognized the name. David was a collector of military memorabilia, and he'd purchased several old blankets from an estate sale in Connecticut. "I think they might be the ones you're looking for," he'd written. He'd been right. 4 more blankets, each with letters sewn into the hems. David had insisted on giving them to the family for free. "These belong with you," he'd said. "Not in my collection." The letters had filled in more pieces of James's story. His fears about the war, his hopes for the future, his love for Rose that never wavered, even knowing she was marrying someone else. One letter, dated just days before he died, simply said, "If I don't make it home, tell them I tried. Tell them I loved them. Tell them it mattered." Rose had cried when she read that one. It did matter, she'd whispered. Every moment mattered. On a warm Sunday afternoon in late spring, Maya drove to Rose's apartment for their weekly lunch. She found her grandmother sitting in her chair, wrapped in the original blanket, looking through an old photo album. "Look at this," Rose said, pointing to a picture. It showed Rose at 19, standing outside Sullivan Textiles with James and his mother. "Catherine found this in another box. I'd forgotten it existed." Maya sat beside her grandmother, studying the photo. Rose looked so young, so hopeful, with no idea of the heartbreak and difficult choices waiting ahead. James had his arm around her shoulders, grinning at the camera like he didn't have a care in the world. "Do you ever regret it?" Maya asked quietly. "The choices you made?" Rose was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that James died. I regret that Linda never got to know him. I regret the war and the waste of it all." She touched the photo gently. "But I don't regret marrying Robert. I don't regret the life we built. I don't regret keeping the secret at the time, even though I'm glad it's finally out now." "That's a complicated answer," Maya said. "It's a complicated life," Rose replied with a small smile. "Nothing's ever just one thing. Love isn't simple. Family isn't simple. We do the best we can with what we know at the time." Maya hugged her grandmother carefully. "I'm glad I bought that blanket." "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." Later that evening, as Maya drove home, she thought about how a single moment in a department store had changed everything. How she'd been stressed and rushed and unprepared, grabbing the first decent gift she saw. How that thoughtless choice had brought truth, pain, healing, and ultimately more love into their lives. She thought about James's letters, written with hope that they'd somehow find their way home. And they had, more than 50 years later, through the hands of a granddaughter he'd never known would exist. Sometimes the most important moments don't feel important at all when they're happening. Sometimes they just feel like buying a blanket on a rainy Thursday evening. But those small moments, those simple choices, they ripple outward in ways nobody can predict. Maya smiled to herself, thinking about the cream-colored blanket that had started it all. It was just fabric and thread, she knew that. But it was also so much more. It was a bridge across time. It was a keeper of secrets. It was proof that love doesn't die just because people do. It was, quite simply, the best $30 she'd ever spent. 5 years after Maya bought the blanket, she stood in front of a small crowd at the local community center. Behind her, displayed on easels, were enlarged photographs. James in uniform, Rose as a young woman, Robert and Rose on their wedding day, Linda as a baby, all the pieces of a story that had been hidden for so long. This exhibit is called Hidden Letters, Maya told the audience. It's about love, loss, and the secrets families keep. But mostly it's about how truth has a way of finding us, even when we're not looking for it. The exhibit had been Linda's idea. After going back to school, she'd become fascinated with oral history and family stories. She'd interviewed Rose for hours, recording everything her mother could remember about that summer in 1968. Catherine had contributed too, sharing memories of her brother and their mother's textile shop. Together, they'd created something beautiful, not just the photographs but also reproductions of James's letters, his drawings, and even one of the actual blankets, displayed in a glass case with its hidden pocket visible. Rose sat in the front row, now 84, holding Linda's hand. Catherine sat beside them with her daughter. 3 generations connected by a man who'd been gone for over 50 years, finally telling his story to the world. After Maya's presentation, people came forward to share their own stories. A Vietnam veteran who'd served in the same unit as James. An elderly woman who remembered Sullivan Textiles and the kind woman who ran it. A young college student writing a thesis on wartime correspondence who asked if she could interview the family. One woman approached Rose with tears in her eyes. "My father never came home from Vietnam either," she said. "He left letters too. I never knew about them until after my mother died. Reading about your story about James's letters, it makes me feel less alone." Rose took the woman's hand. "Our stories matter. All of them. That's why we're sharing this." That evening, back at Rose's apartment, the family gathered one more time. Maya ordered pizza. Linda brought wine. Catherine had driven down from Portland with her grandchildren, who were fascinated by this great-uncle they'd never known. The cream-colored blanket was draped across Rose's chair as always, threadbare now in places from years of constant use. Maya touched it gently, remembering that rainy evening so long ago when she'd grabbed it without thinking. "You know what's funny?" Linda said, refilling everyone's wine glasses. "If you hadn't forgotten Grandma's birthday, if you hadn't been rushing, if you'd gone to literally any other store, none of this would have happened." "I think about that sometimes," Maya admitted. "Don't," Rose said firmly. "Don't think about what might have been. Think about what is. We found each other. We found James's story. We found Catherine and her family. We found truth." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Sometimes things happen exactly the way they're supposed to, even when it doesn't feel that way at the time." Catherine raised her glass. "To James, to Rose, to Robert. To all the love stories, spoken and unspoken. To family," Linda added. "To $30 blankets," Maya said with a smile. They all laughed and clinked their glasses together. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside, 3 generations of women sat together, wrapped in warmth and memory and love. The blanket had done its job. It had brought them home to each other, and that Maya thought was the greatest gift of all.